Hey, all you cool cats and kittens, it's your favorite history teacher back at you again with another historical video. And today, we got a doozy. We're continuing on following our last lecture, and we're going to start talking about the antebellum period, the period it's the period of strife before the Civil War. And boy, do we got some drama. So let's get into it. Let's not waste any of your time. All right. Here we go. There you go. Antebellum America. Again, antebellum meaning the time before the Civil War. Okay. That was your warm-up. Objectives. We're going to discuss the result of United States territorial expansion, describe the increased sectional conflicts that developed during this time period, analyze the Second Great Awakening, the spurred interest into reforming society. All right, so sectionalism, trying to understand what that is. The Louisiana Purchase and improved transportation spurred new settlement of the west of the Mississippi River. Some of these new settlements became so large that they applied for statehood very soon. The controversy of having the new state of Missouri caused a huge uproar across America. Would it become a slave state or would it become a free state? So in 1819, at the time, there were 11 free states and 11 slave states in the Union, in the country. Adding a new state, whether free or slave, would upset the balance between which section of America had more influence in the government and politics. So you are seeing right around this time the differences between the North and the South, economies, cultures, the way they do trade, everything is different. Obviously, the Northerners opposed extending slavery into the new Western territories, giving slave states more influence in politics. Southerners feared that if slavery couldn't continue, new free states would give the North enough votes to outlaw slavery forever. Oh no, like that's a bad thing. It, of course, is a bad thing. So this is the map of America. The delicate balance of power, 11 free, 11 slave. Okay, the key detail. You're gonna be on your test. I can tell you right now. Missouri's government, this area right here, that's modern day Missouri. Okay, Missouri's government applied for admission into the Union as a slave state, 1819. However, there's going to be a holding period. And Maine, remember our 13 colonies map? Maine, not a state, a once district of Massachusetts, applied for statehood 1 year later. The Senate voted to admit Maine as a free state, Missouri as a slave state. That sounds simple, right? Well, the Senate added an amendment to prohibit slavery in the rest of the Louisiana Territory north of Missouri's southern boundary. Now, if you think about it, obviously Southerners agree. If you think about it, look at this, okay? Slavery cannot be extended north of Missouri's southern boundary. So therefore, shouldn't slavery not be in Missouri? I don't know. It's a very, very weird question. So here you have the Missouri Compromise line, the 3630 line, and you have free states in blue, slave states in red, territories in red because they are below the 3630 line. Here's our president, fifth president, James Monroe. So foreign affairs. Spanish-held Florida, as you just saw in this map, used to be owned by Spain. Spanish-held Florida was a source of frustration for Southerners. Runaway slaves hid down there and frequently encountered the Seminole tribe. If you know football or baseball or basketball, Florida State, their mascot, the Seminole. Spain had trouble controlling the border. Secretary of War John C. Calhoun will send troops under Andrew Jackson's command to put pressure on Spain. At this time in the world, Spain had a lot of problems in its new empire as colonies across the world were fighting for their independence, especially Central and South America. Spain decided to say, we'll give you the whole of Florida in what's known as the Adams-Onis Treaty, 1819. Then Monroe decides to step up to the plate. This is on your test. Big time. Monroe Doctrine. So with Spain's problems, other European monarchies pledged to support Spain to help quell these rebellions. Because if Spain's colonies are having rebellions, guess what other colonies are going to have rebellions worldwide? They don't want that to happen. And Great Britain and the United States did not want Spain to regain control of their colonies. So it's like, bad business is good business for us, you know? And Russia was also claiming their own piece of the pie in the Oregon Territory and Alaska in America. So Monroe creates the Monroe Doctrine, December 1823. And he declared the American continents no longer be viewed as open for colonization, meaning European nations should respect the sovereignty of LA Latin American nations, more so for Latin America, but basically telling all other basically European countries that no, you cannot come here to colonize. At the same time, Monroe is thinking, well, if those countries in Europe are gone, who's left to take control and influence the area? America. Exactly. That's going to cause some problems later, but you know, America. So he's the fifth president. Obviously, I said that earlier. He was the first to create a new national bank, the first bank charter, like I said, last lecture, wasn't renewed, proved to be disastrous. States lended banknotes and used as money, and prices rose rapidly during the War of 1812. There's a tariff of 1816, which protected American manufacturers by taxing imports. Remember, stuff you bring in, and that's not good. Republicans wanted to build roads and canals. Madison vetoed this, saying the Constitution didn't empower Congress to improve transportation. And then we have another big court case. Probably, I wouldn't say it's up there, but early on American history, yeah, it's on almost the same level as Marbury versus Madison. So between 1816 and 1824, Chief Justice John Marshall interprets the Constitution broadly or loosely to support federal power. In the court case McCulloch versus Maryland, the state government tried to tax the Baltimore branch of the Second Bank of the United States. The Supreme Court ruled that the federal government has a right to create a national bank. The Constitution gave the federal government power to collect taxes, power to borrow money, regulate commerce, raise armies and navies. It ruled that the federal government was supreme, quote, supreme in its own sphere of action. Meaning, what does that mean? A state government can't interfere with an agency of the federal government exercising its specific constitutional powers within state borders. Maryland is trying to tax the federal government for having the bank in Maryland. No. Another court case. I'm not going to make you know it. It's whatever. Gibbons versus Ogden. Supreme Court ruled that states could regulate commerce only within their borders. Control of interstate commerce, like selling stuff from Maryland to, say, Pennsylvania, that was a federal right, not a state right. So the federal government is getting more power. And that was what the Democrat Republicans did not want. You know, Jefferson, Madison. Anyways. Expansion in transportation. With rapid expansion, the government wanted to connect the distant regions of the country. So the Industrial Revolution going on in Europe is obviously brought here in America. 1806, the National Road was built, a major east-west highway. States would take charge in setting that up and creating it. Rivers proved better efficiency and cheaper prices for shipping, and steamboats and riverboats galore across America. By the early 1800s, the IR means Industrial Revolution, innovations came to America. It's going to transform the economy and society, as we all know from last year. And the country is going to quickly transform due to free enterprise and private property rights. And one such example is Peter Cooper and his Tom Thumb locomotive. And obviously this picture is showing that a horse and a train can go at the same pace. If not, the train goes a little bit faster. Industrialization. Again, knowing the differences between the North and the South. The North, heavily industrialized. And obviously they're the first to take it. The Northeast, kind of, that's where all the manufacturing trade business is done. Textile mills are sprouting up everywhere. The use of interchangeable parts led by New Englander Eli Whitney, he's going to become a little more famous, to have factories produce lumber, shoes, leather, wagons, and other parts, using these interchangeable parts of the machine to make different products. The sewing machine would lead to an inexpensive clothing to be produced, and canneries allowed foods to be stored and transported without fear of spoilage. Next time you open your next can of Chef Boyardee, check the expiration date. And F.B. Morse perfected the telegraph. Remember last year, the Industrial Revolution was all about innovation and tinker and improvements. So the telegraph was created, and the telegraph would be improved and then perfected under Morse. And then he's going to create a system of communication that's going to be named after him, known as Morse code, the tapping of the telegraph. So mass transit was able to receive news quicker. And yeah, here's Morse and his telegraph. All right, so immigration. Many cities over this time between, 1800 and the Civil War, obviously we're going to grow as a country due to immigration. Many cities will double and triple overnight. People came from farms and villages to work in higher paying jobs. Immigrants would come to the United States for a better life. And in my estimate, that's kind of like the real American dream, right? Coming to America to improve your life, your livelihood. The presence of different people from different cultures, speaking different languages, and having different religions is going to produce this feelings of nativism. Nativism sounds just like what it is. Early on, racism. Nativism, if you're native to this America at this time. And the early Americans were very anti-Catholic, as a lot of Catholics were coming from Ireland and Germany. Keep the Catholics out from public office, kind of like what Parliament did. So we talked about the North, obviously the South. The South, let's hold the brakes on industrialization, like that's not going to bite them in the butt or something. Despite what they felt the rapid bandwagoning towards industrializing the nation, agriculture still remained the country's leading economic activity. It employed more people and had more wealth, and it seemed less risky. Farming was important to the South. The South had major cash crops: tobacco, rice, sugarcane. And of all those, the most important was cotton. And there's a cotton belt where cotton grows the best, from South Carolina all the way south to Texas. Eli Whitney, 1793, invents the cotton gin. And because of this creation, slavery was able to expand. Now, that's not to say that slavery would have stopped if he didn't invent this creation, this device, but it did make it a lot easier, and the demand for cotton going to skyrocket. Southern cotton accounted for 2/3 of U.S. exports as a country by 1860. 2/3 of what we're selling out to the world, king cotton, cotton from the South. Cotton is king. That's all she wrote. Here's a picture of the cotton. You put it in over here. It combs through the seeds. You turn the wheel, you turn the handle. The brushes take out the seeds, and you get clean cotton. Backwoods. All right, obviously the South, you don't remember from 8th grade, the South lagged behind the North in industrialization. The South had scattered textile mills, coal and iron and copper mines. Not a lot. However, cotton plantations created a high demand for slave labor, large fields, cotton. If you've ever seen the movie 12 Years a Slave, or is it 10 Years a Slave? I think it's 12 Years a Slave. 12 Years a Slave. Cotton picking is a arduous task, and it takes a long time. So, yeah, if you have large fields solely just growing cotton, it's a lot of tedious picking out from cotton. And cotton's not easy to pick. If you've ever seen the movie, they display it really good. There are thorns surrounding these cotton plants, and getting cut up and scraped up around your hands and your fingers. It's an arduous task. Okay. Congress, remember, outlawed the foreign slave trade in 1808. However, a high birth rate among enslaved women is going to keep the population of slaves growing. Between 1820 and 1850, slaves totaled nearly 3.2 million people. 37%, almost more than 1/3 of the South's population were slaves or enslaved people. Here's a picture of a group of slaves picking cotton. Obviously, we know slaves were horribly mistreated. And slaves also built their own communities, since they kind of didn't have anything else but work and themselves. Election of 1824. Not going to just listen, because drama, politicians make a lot of drama. So the Republican Party, Democrat Republicans, now Republicans, remained the only political party in American politics, but the divisions on certain issues were brewing amongst party members. On the election day, 4 Republicans ran for office. Andrew Jackson, former military hero, War of 1812, led in both popular vote and the Electoral College, but did not meet the minimum requirement to make the majority win outright. The tiebreaker, of course, went to the House of Representatives, as detailed in the Constitution. The representatives chose from the 3 top vote getters. The result: Henry Clay, probably the most important man to never become president, politically, placed 4th, was automatically eliminated. However, Clay, if you don't know, had a lot of influence in politics. So since he didn't win, he told all his supporters to vote for John Quincy Adams. Adams will win easily, 13 votes to Jackson's 7 to William Crawford's 4 votes. That's a majority. Once in office, Adams immediately appoints Clay his Secretary of State. Jackson, outraged for not winning, called it, quote, a corrupt bargain. So Jackson, still outraged from losing and claiming that Adams and Clay had this agreement with no real proof, Jackson and his followers are going to decide to break away from the party. They are called Jacksonians, supporters of Jackson, and they're going to call themselves the Democratic Republicans, later shortened to Democrats. Adams and his followers called themselves the National Republicans. All these different words, different parties. That's John Quincy Adams. As sixth president under Adams, hundreds of thousands of white males gained the right to vote. This was due to states lowering property qualifications or elimination of property qualifications. States did this to follow what the Declaration of Independence said about social equality. Towns and cities grew, especially the number of working class who did not own property. These people paid taxes and had an interest in political affairs. Duh. Expansion of voting rights was evident in the 1828 election when 1.1 million people voted for the presidency. In 1824, 4 years ago, only 355,000 voted. So a third less people, or a third of that total. You know what I meant when I said a third. The election of 1828, Adams versus Jackson Part 2. Both candidates resorted to attacking each other's personalities and morals. When the results came in, Jackson won 56% of the popular vote, 178 of the 261 votes in the Electoral College, which is a clear majority win. Most of his support came from the South and the West, which were first-time voters who felt Jackson would support their causes, their ideas more than what Adams said he was going to do. And that's Andrew Jackson, the guy on he's on the $20, and he's no longer on the $20 bill, I believe. Don't quote me. As president, Jackson tried to make the government more inclusive. He tried to strengthen the democracy by utilizing the spoils system. The spoils system was set out to improve party loyalty by eliminating permanent office holding classes. So jobs opened up for ordinary citizens, or to put your homies in office. He and his supporters tried to make the political system more democratic. Party members would hold closed-door meetings, aka caucuses, to choose the party's nominee for president. And that's what we do today. Jackson believed that this restricted access to the office to elites and the well-connected. So now regular people can now vote. Thank you, Jackson. Jacksonians replaced the caucus with the National Nominating Convention for that party's presidential nominee. Again, that evolved from Jackson, and that's what we have today. Okay, nullification crisis. It's quite big. If we're talking about antebellum, the period before the Civil War, got to know this because of what happens later. He being Jackson had not been in office before South Carolina's beef with the division of the North and South ensued. During the early 1800s, South Carolina's economy had been growing weak, and many residents blamed their troubles on the nation's tariff policies. Remember, taxing things being brought into the country. South Carolina had very little state industry, so they purchased a lot of goods from England. Tariffs made goods from England more expensive. After Congress imposed a new tariff in 1828, South Carolinians threatened to secede, leave the country, leave the Union. All this turmoil really took a toll on Vice President John C. Calhoun, who was from South Carolina. He tried to support his homies back in South Carolina to resist this tariff. Imagine the president who enforces the laws is then being backstabbed by his vice president who's telling the people of South Carolina to go against the tariff. Jackson said the idea of nullification, or not Jackson, Calhoun said nullification, which he argued that the states create the federal government. The states should have a right to declare laws null or void, meaning not valid. They cannot exist here. Then there's going to be the Webster versus Hayne debate in Congress. Robert Hayne from South Carolina stated that liberty came first and the idea of a federal union came second. Daniel Webster, Webster's dictionary, very articulate, countered that liberty nor the union could survive with the binding of federal laws. He said liberty and union, freedom, togetherness, country, now and forever, one and inseparable. Insert mic drop. In 1832, Congress passes another tariff. South Carolinians threatened again to secede, and the state legislature voted to nullify the tariff. Then Jackson steps in, declares nullification is treasonous, and sent a warship to Charleston to show his might. Henry Clay steps in, again, Henry Clay, steps in to defuse the situation, insisting Congress just lower the tariffs until 1842, and South Carolina repealed its threat to secede very shortly. Then the Native American question pops up. Slavery obviously still remained a hot topic, but Jackson decided to focus on the Native American problem. Although he wanted to continue the survival of Native American peoples, he accelerated the national effort of removing them from their land to pave the way for new settlers in the territories. In 1830, he signed the Indian Removal Act, where the federal government would help states relocate the Native Americans in their state to the largely uninhabited regions of the Mississippi River, west of the Mississippi River. The Cherokee tribe in Georgia appealed to the Supreme Court. Chief Justice John Marshall, still in charge, sided with the Cherokees' rights to control their lands in two, not one, two Supreme Court cases, Cherokee Nation versus Georgia and Worcester versus Georgia. Do you think that the American government would hold that law, uphold it? Well, not until this guy, Martin Van Buren. Martin Van Buren is Jackson's successor. Carrying on from that, although Jackson is largely disliked for doing the Indian Removal Act, it is Van Buren who actually sends in the troops to do the whole Trail of Tears removal of Native American, Native Indigenous peoples from their lands. VB is Van Buren. That's his last name. I'm pointing at the screen. You can't see that. VB is Van Buren. So 1838, the army was sent in to forcibly remove the Cherokee. Around 2,000 Cherokee Indians, Native Americans, Native Americans died in the camps while just waiting for their long march to begin. There were no trains. There were no cars, no airplanes. They had to walk. Known as the Trail of Tears, and another 2,000 other Cherokees would die of starvation and disease while making the walk from Georgia to Oklahoma. Henry Clay declared that Jackson's policies towards Native Americans stained the nation's honor. Now, we have a horrible track record with those people. Here's a map of the Trail of Tears in the South. As you know, your warm-up was about this as well. So they had to walk from Georgia over here. The 5 civilized tribes, as they're called, the Seminole, the Cherokee, I think that's the Creek, the Choctaw, and the Chickasaw. Those are the 5 civilized tribes, the 5 main tribes that were forced from their homes. Yes. Second Great Awakening. All right, so around this time, church leaders were fearing the growth of science, the growth of scientific knowledge and rationalism. Were challenging the doctrine of faith. Protestant denominations, Methodists, Baptists, and Presbyterians held camp meetings with their followers where they prayed, sang, and participated in outpourings of faith. Charles G. Finney used methods he learned as a lawyer to teach his followers about revivalism evangelists that use today. More groups. More religious groups are created in the Second Great Awakening, just like in the First Great Awakening. The new religious groups were Unitarianism, Universalism, and the Church of Latter-day Saints, aka Mormons, will flourish. Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon Church, would be harassed in New York, Ohio, and Missouri. He moved to Illinois and was successful there. However, persecution continued and he would be murdered. His followers, got the hell out of there and settled permanently in the West, modern day Utah. There's Joseph Smith. So, ideas. Now, revivalists preach power of the individual to improve themselves and the world. Lyman Beecher insisted the nation's citizens, more than the government, were responsible for building a better society. So most of the early stuff focused on converting the non-believers, but more social problems occurred. Mainly, what do we do about women? So more and more unmarried women will join the revivalist movement. So we have the temperance movement. And this is reformers energizing a campaign by preaching the evils of alcohol and urged heavy drinkers to give up the bottle. 1851, Maine passed the first prohibition law, halt the sale of liquor. Other states will follow, passing local option laws, giving rights to villages to decide whether or not to sell booze. Then you also have prisons and education reform. It replaced overcrowded prisons with penitentiaries, which rehabilitated rather than locking up people and get them, ready for society after their prison term ends. And states also began to fund public education around this time. Here's a famous campaign of the temperance movement. Lips that touch liquor shall not touch ours. Obviously, alcohol abuse led to domestic violence, domestic abuse. So women and children were the recipients of said abuse. Sad times. So women's movement starts around this time as well. And obviously we know they had no rights. There was no need for them to become educated voters, and they were left out on receiving education. Factories sprouted up. Men left home for the work, so women stayed and tended to the children, to raise the children. They believed the woman's only job was to stay home. Men believed a woman's job was only to stay at home and prepare their children for a proper Christian life. However, a number of women are going to take advantage of the reform movement to create more educational opportunities for girls and young women. So one such leader, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, organized a women's movement with the Seneca Falls Convention. And the women there are going to create the Seneca Falls Declaration, kind of like modeled after the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal. This will shock women who attend and begin the ideas of women's suffrage, the right to vote. So throughout the 1850s, women will gather to promote greater rights for themselves. Here's Elizabeth Cady Stanton. The abolitionist movement, kind of getting rid of slavery. Obviously, slavery, bad. Early 1800, people started calling for the immediate end to slavery. If I had a foreshadow filter, for the Civil War. In opposition to slavery began as early as the American Revolutionary War. The abolitionist movement gained ground thanks to William Lloyd Garrison's The Liberator, calling for the immediate emancipation of enslaved persons. Here's William Lloyd Garrison. African-American abolitionist. The most famous African-American abolitionist is Frederick Douglass, who escaped slavery from Maryland, MD, Maryland. Most famous, Frederick Douglass. Might be a test question. He will publish his own anti-slavery paper called The North Star. And Sojourner Truth gained her freedom in 1827 when New York freed all remaining enslaved peoples. And she gave eloquent and deeply religious anti-slavery speeches that attracted huge crowds. There's Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, and that is it. Hopefully you guys did enjoy that. I know it was a lot. Not a lot of writing though. I'm trying to, cut that down. So without further ado, your homework is page 73, 2 through 4. Look at that. I got my book right in front of me. We don't got to run to it. So page 73, 2 through 4. And yeah, hopefully you guys did enjoy that. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, subscribe for your boy. It helps me out. All right. Stay safe and wash your hands. Peace.